So it's a thrill to again be talking with Simon Denny, both of us victims of the same part of the earth, and maybe victims of television, and maybe since the television is what we're going to talk about, I'm super curious right off the bat whether you think television is gone, you know, or the opposite, that we're like deeper inside television than ever before. So, yeah, I mean, so deep we don't even see it, right?
Right. I mean, I guess for me, first of all, thanks for doing this. I'm very excited about this book, and also to speak to you, Mark. But yeah. I mean, I think it depends on what you mean by television. Of course, I mean, this is an obvious answer, but like, of course, in terms of screens and interacting via screens everywhere, can only be proliferated. And also the logic of the way that television makes people perform and think and communicate, I guess, is proliferating, right? But I guess if it's in terms of network direction and style of communication in that sense, then it's very different, and it's a totally other thing. And I guess when I was very interested in television about 10 years ago, or even a bit more, when I kind of started to make work explicitly about television, when I was really excited about it, it was exactly at the time that Web 2.0 was kind of getting started. And it was kind of taking over. And when like me and my friends in art school in Frankfurt were just like totally obsessed with what the hell was going on with Facebook and why it existed and what was happening, my kind of, I guess, maybe academic mind, like, was looking backwards and thinking, okay, what were artists doing in the 1970s with broadcast, you know? And I was explicitly thinking about the differences between like, between center margin signal sending and kind of peer-to-peer conversations, because like the people in the 70s were so interested in these things as well, and I was kind of like,
But it's interesting. I mean, what you say. I mean, I'm remain permanently addicted to McLuhan's idea that that media is environment, and environment is exactly that which you don't see, and it only becomes visible when it's displaced by a new medium. And so, it kind of makes sense in that sense that you would have emerged as an artist working with television exactly in that moment in which maybe television was being displaced. So,
exactly.
So your work was sort of received by people as super urgent and all of that, and I think still to this day, right? And yet it was also historical.
That's the weird thing. I mean, friends of mine were doing different things. I mean, I was very much part of a group at the time, discursively, and we were all kind of like very into finding out what the hell we were dealing with in this moment or whatever. I mean, I moved actually from New Zealand, where we both grew up, and I moved in 2007. So literally the year that the iPhone was released and that Facebook was kind of emerging as something as a dominant platform, right? And so that was like really kind of cool. And as I was moving and saying goodbye to a bunch of people, it also meant that I was keeping in touch, and these platforms were, you know, more important for me than anything else. So it was like, it was a biographical aspect of that, but yeah. And then my instinct was to say, okay, I like to think about how artists have dealt with this, and I immediately looked to like, Top Value Television and Raindance Corporation and like these kind of canonical things that I was just learning about at the time, and thinking like, well, then what would those same people do with this environment? But somehow that took me to the end of things as well, and it was something I was thinking about, also transitioning from what was somebody who was very interested in objects and being kind of sculptural to somebody who was thinking a little bit more about artistic research. And that was also something interesting for me, because I was trying to imbue like televisual objects, like whatever, like receivers, screens, old screens, with kind of meaning at this moment of kind of losing something. So it was a kind of elegy to the loss of a certain style of video installation. That was like one thing that I was thinking about. I was like, okay, what happens with no more like CRT tube TVs? Like that will make these physical environments be very different. Like obviously there's been projection for a while, but like if you put a screen in a room, it will be forever retro to have a box there, or else you have to have some kind of flat screen. I was thinking about that as somebody who was interested in the physical environment, but also about what that meant in terms of networks, because as the screens were thinning, also the networks were changing, right? And so like for me, it was trying to kind of put that meaning onto those objects, or bring them together somehow.
Right, and you kind of, it definitely was the feeling of a kind of media archaeology, right? Because you, in your early shows, there's even a kind of like evolution of the television set, from these mega sets through to the very thin ones. I imagine, for example, if you made the same exhibition today, people
Very different thing.
under a certain age wouldn't even know that that's what that was. Like, wouldn't even know that that's a kind of thinning out. They might have thought of it the other way around. They might have thought, well, the screen at the end, the thin one, that's normal. And everything else is something new, like something
or something
amazing. Yeah. And so sort of Denny 1.1 or 1.0 comes out when Internet 2.0 comes out.
Right.
I'm tempted, by the way. Are we still in Internet 2.0, or has the number gone up?
Well, I mean, this segment, like, I mean, as an artist, I was very interested in mapping exactly this type of rhetoric for a while, like what kind of people were claiming what about what moment, and particularly commercial people, I was very interested in following. And of course, this is why one of the reasons why I got super interested in the claims of blockchain when it emerged, because, you know, blockchain was claiming Web3, right? They were like, okay, yeah, that was Web 2. Now, and there were all sorts of different, like, I mean, I guess I speak about it historically, but I guess it still is a current claim to some extent. But like, the Web3 would involve a financial layer. So if Web 1 was links and websites, and Web 2 was social, then Web 3 would be financial. Like that's sort of the claim.
So according to this Darwinian view of Denny that's emerging, the arrival of, sure enough, the arrival of Internet 3.0 means the arrival also of Denny 2.0, the Bitcoin. But it seems to me maybe something has a little bit changed, because if in the beginning I could, and I just did, call you a kind of archaeologist or even a historian of things that people were kind of disappearance of the volume of the object into the screen that maybe some people would be aware of, but maybe now not. In Denny 2.0, actually, it's not, the role of the historian doesn't quite fit anymore, because actually you become almost indistinguishable from the thing that you're working on. So even if there is this gap between, let's say, 3.0 and Denny 2.0, Denny 2.0 can hardly be spotted. It's sort of grafted into 3.0, such that I have every right to ask you now if we are in Internet 3.0, because you're no longer an artist referring to, let's say, technological mafias and so on. And you're not part of those mafias either, but you are at least have managed to make it seem right that an artist would be involved in those conversations as they are occurring, let's say, rather than, you know, kind of reflecting. So I don't know if we stay with this Darwinian view, whether you're becoming increasingly synchronized, whether you feel that's the case. Because if that's true, by the way, if we were to talk next year, you might be a little bit ahead of the, you know, like you would sell yourself. You would sell yourself. But do you feel like that somewhat? Like I definitely, in the Bitcoin moment and the DLD project, right? Like what's around 2013. You started to be pretty camouflaged into the thing that you were analyzing, right?
Yeah, I think that is true. And I think I was just also very excited to get to know what that stuff was and who was doing it. It was also like a kind of a flurry of energy that I got from being adjacent to people. But I also have to say, like, the difference between looking at Web 2.0 and the tail end of it, and maybe the DLD project and being around people who were making companies. And I did this project called, I live in Berlin, and I did this project called Disruptive Berlin, which was like looking at the scene here as well. The difference between that moment and the moment when I got involved in blockchain and conversations around blockchain is that actually the people making the technology were closer to artists in that space. So that was another difference sociologically. I think the type of person that would make a blockchain company would be more likely to be interested in art than the type of person making a Web 2.0 social company. That definitely, and there was a firm crossover of people who were both interested in art and actually making blockchain things in a very different way than I found, at least when I was doing my research during Web 2.0.
So it's much more interesting than what I said, right? Rather than you, as it were, self-consciously becoming a kind of embedded reporter or whatever.
Right.
It's coming the other way, that they're kind of reaching out towards kind of transgressive domains of discourse or whatever.
Well, and I think it's also a bit like blockchain's a bit more specialist in terms of discourse. Like it's a bit more intimidating also. Like, you know, Facebook, people kind of get it, right? They may not get the code, but also the code is not part of the discourse or part of the claims of those companies.
Right.
Whereas with blockchain, like it's quite a lot of technology and theory and governance structures and blah, 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 like quite academic stuff, which I think the type of mind who would kind of go on to that is a bit closer to the type of mind that was attracted to studying a certain type of research, art or architecture or something like that. So I think that reason is also more of a crossover. And yeah, you're right. Like when I made a show in 2016 about blockchain, like again, with blockchain at that point, but like about blockchain, about people using blockchain, about the claims of blockchain, people from the blockchain community in New York and in Berlin flocked to it and then reached out to me, and that was different than when I made art about startups, because they did not.
You were not a startup.
No, I wasn't a hit.
You could be started up. I mean, but maybe this is how we can connect with this book on Waxman, because as you know, that for Waxman, along with other you know, thinkers and artists and philosophers and so on, television was almost a word for radical democracy, right? It was sort of like interactive television, and already from, you know, the 1920s, there is this idea at the very birth of the first electric TV. There is this, people just feel pretty sure that what we'll do in the future is Zoom, basically, right? And you know, literally in 27, there's a newspaper article that says, okay, I've seen the TV, and here's what's going to happen. People will do business now by sitting in rooms with a bunch of screens. They use the word screen even. So for people like Waxman and others, and it is sort of radical democracy, and presumably they would be disappointed by kind of what happened with the technology that they celebrated and so on. But I hear echoes in the blockchain narrative, or the blockchain's own narrative about itself, that it is exactly kind of fixing the problem. If television and its descendants allowed for a kind of micromanagement of individuals, and even a kind of extraction, ruthless and relentless, even while we sleep, extraction from our brains, for particular purposes, it seems like blockchain kind of announces itself as kind of debugging the aspiration to radical democracy. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, there's some people claim that, I would say, and there are certain kind of utopian end of the blockchain people, or at least rhetorically
imagine a world where trust is guaranteed,
claiming space
that
would be that would see that. And but there are other people that kind of pull that apart and say, hey, that's actually not possible with that technology, and actually it's about something else. So there's a range, but there's definitely the aspirational end of that, which operates, I think, rhetorically in a very similar space. I agree, and this is also one of the things that I focused on also when I've also curated around art made with and about blockchain, and that was one of the things that I tried to underline, was that there were these continuities with, let's say, or I was speaking about artists, but like with the kind of dreams of people like in radical software, and you know, I actually reached out at one point and tried to get an interview with Beryl Cora and wanted to ask her some of the tough questions about how you know, in terms of working somebody who was very optimistic about the direction of what kind of you know, self-publishing of video and video communication and kind of like these platforms would bring, that what she felt about what is often said now about YouTubes and Facebooks and things, which is that they enable the growth of right-wing discourse and blah blah blah, and I also asked other people that were in Raindance Corporation as well about exactly this, and lol, there's a phone call, but like they kind of don't want to speak to that, which is really interesting. They didn't really take on those questions, and when I tried to frame them, they rejected the premise also.
That's super interesting. Actually, Beryl, who's amazing, used to be our neighbor.
Oh wow!
For
I'm
a while.
A big fan.
Yeah. She's amazing, and I mean, but it's super interesting. You're saying that they don't want to kind of revisit the. I mean, it would be a bit like crushing your childhood dream or something, right? Like it's.
I think they feel like it's something else. you know.
I think it's different.
I would claim it's not, you know,
Yeah.
like I would claim it is a part of the whole, and like, and that's also something I find interesting. I also don't think because technology goes in a direction which is enables things that you don't expect, even you know, supposedly negative things, that doesn't mean it's not something interesting to talk about. But like, it's
right. Yeah. But in your work, if we, I mean, these are kind of super crude, you know, generalizations, right? But I noticed that pretty much all the way through your work, and maybe there is the sense that it's all one, you know, kind of research, right? That and we get to see slices of it in films and galleries and biennales and so on. There's slices of this thinking, and this thinking always somehow involves, seems to me, an intimacy, a kind of almost embarrassing intimacy between a kind of dream of a more radical democracy and actually the kind of arrival of an even more pernicious sort of surveillance system, and that these two, they're intimate because the technology is more or less the same. In other words, the technology, even the thought of what is the technology gets named as, you know, I was about to say something even more stupid than what I said before. Like, it's not even that one side names it democratic and the other doesn't, because of course the surveillance team also names what they're doing democracy.
Well, yeah. And I mean, so many, I'm sure you've read these kinds of claims as well, but like a number of commentators remind us all constantly that the development of networks is also the development of information gathering by definition. So these things have always been about surveillance, and they are designed as surveillance, and they are never not surveillance. So this idea that surveillance creeps in on a kind of like superstructure layer or something like that is naive, you know. You know, but it always does other things as well, right? So that's, I guess, so it is built by people with money who control political power, like such as governments and well-funded companies. But it is then other things happen on the side other than their aim, right?
So staying with that thought for a moment, again, if I go back to the 20s and you know, because I'm super obsessed with the history of whatever television is, right? Or what that word has meant for a whole lot of different people through time. Yeah. And probably it's also true that just as some kind of idea of democracy is, or connectivity, interactivity, and some degree of solidarity through interconnectivity, it is always accompanied by the surveillance narrative as well, and the idea that interactivity offers defense and comfort precisely because you, as it were, know your enemy and know where your enemy is, and therefore it's a kind of offers itself as maintaining everybody's place. So it means also maintaining inequities at a massive level. Yeah. So I think so I guess you and I agree about this, that when there's a group of people saying TV is sort of going to be everything for everyone, and even inside their story is a kind of, I mean, these are generally pretty privileged types. Yes. Even when you get to kind of fringe New York artists, okay, it's New York, you know, you know, predominantly white artists have found a way to survive and so on. And so even their thoughts have built into them an enormous sort of service infrastructure. Yes. And who of maybe people that are watching TV. Like I think of that moment in New York where public television was like the kind of artists' venue for kind of countercultural programming. Yeah, that moment of cable, right? I mean, that was also exactly what was fascinating me. Yeah. But there's still somehow a kind of docile audience presupposed, and a difference between a kind of good viewer and a not good viewer, like the very idea of the public TV. Right. The idea that we could make a good public if only we could show them enough good art. So again, this could sound like kind of pessimistic, but maybe not. It's just that somehow technologies always, it seems, speaking generally, offer some kind of expansion of the human as a creature, which is always somehow also an expansion of the, you know, cruelties and blindnesses and iniquities and so on. And I don't know, it's a sort of a question. I just feel like I'm curious about whether you feel things are moving in a more pessimistic direction, or, I mean, what I'm suggesting is a more uniformly pessimistic view. Do you see an evolution in this sort of thing?
I would just agree with you, but I would also just say, like, it's sort of unsurprising when you when I kind of frame it in the terms which I've come to think about it, is in that, like, it's unsurprising that the dynamics are maintained by a technology which is funded by the powers that have an interest in maintaining that.
Right.
Dynamic.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, of course, a technology will continue that proliferates and is funded and pushed by whatever version of power that you want to think about. Is something that continues and maintains that power on the whole, because otherwise they wouldn't put all of these resources, which nobody else has to build these things, into doing so. Yeah,
right.
So that is totally logical also.
So it's the least surprising thing in the world. Right?
I mean, maybe not the least surprising thing in the world, but when you lay it out in those terms, it seems unsurprising, right? Like, I mean, I read this book by Yasha Levine, which is like a military history of how the internet was built, and I mean, it looks back at those different types, and at the moment I'm also looking at various different moments and different parts of Pacific history and how technologies have done that too, and so I don't know. I mean, it's interesting but unsurprising when you lay it in those terms. Who built these things and why? It's
and again, maybe holding on to this sort of 19th century idea that even the technology, it's not so clear that the human makes the technology. The technology also remakes the being that then claims to have made it. So this even the ownership, let's say, by forces of state or corporation or enormously, privileged individuals. I was thinking, if you even today, if you were to write a science fiction novel that would say that more than half of the planet would agree that all of their private, everything about them, every piece of information about them, every thought, sexual, economic, and so on, personal, professional, would be owned by a company, and that company would be owned essentially by a teenager who's trying to figure out his sort of place in the scheme of things, with not much clarity. No editor at a publishing house would accept it. They say, well, that's just ridiculous.
Right.
But it is exactly the world that we live in now, which renders national borders and even national warfare and so on somewhat secondary to this. In that world, the sort of uber pessimistic view is that this is not even a matter of demonizing the teenager or whatever. It's not even a matter of our kind of all of our collective unconscious having kind of, as it were, invented this infrastructure. Just some deeper level of uncertainty in the kind of human technology relationship. And I see all of your work as kind of painting some kind of portrait of that relationship.
Yeah.
You tend not to editorialize, and I don't want, like, since we're talking together, that you now say, well, what I really think is, but because who knows whether this interview is an artwork or not, right? I mean, it's more like I feel, maybe to frame it in terms of television, whether TV, whether you see that we are TV, that it's not simply a matter of watching TV, but that so when I said at the beginning, is television gone? Does that, I guess the question was really, are we still TV like ourselves? Like we're still somehow in the middle of those narratives?
Yeah, and I mean, again, maybe a little bit like what I said at the beginning, I think we are in terms of behaviors which we internalize by watching and using a screen-based and entertainment-based, broadly, you can say that, like, logic for communication. And, I mean, who's more the TV president? Is it JFK or is it Trump? Right? I mean, you could put them on on a stage, but the logic is accelerated, right? And Trump is the quickest. I don't know what that means about Biden, but but yeah, I mean, yes, we are more televisual than ever. A lot of Orwellian things ring true, but on the other hand, it is this own kind of self-eating, bastardized version of that at the same time, which has other dynamics other than if you say that an important part of television is an idea of the public and a kind of Edward Bernays idea of, like, how to speak to and control an existing public, then that has somewhat been something else, something other, because there is no public to address, and publics are made and remade by people that don't understand what they're doing when they make them. Seemingly, it's
right. And this thinness that you have thought about, like I almost think of you kind of leaving New Zealand on a TV set, like one of the bigger ones that has some air in it, but by the time you get to the north, it's just flattened into a surfboard or something.
That's absolutely right.
You kind of arrive into the conversation through this question of TV, and I seem to remember this sentence. I don't know if it's yours or somebody about you, or even you don't agree with it, that painting is just a television that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Is that you?
I think that was Norman Klein, actually.
Okay. So what do you think about
this? A different moment of criticism also, which is, it's again,
really?
That was my, I mean, I was very interested in people that worked with TV right from the 70s on until that point. I got very into it. I did dialogues with Judith Barry, who's another person that...
she's fantastic.
Yeah, she's amazing. And also her exhibition design was a very big inspiration at the time as well. And Norman Klein was a guy that I was really interested in because he made criticism around that time around, video installation and the changing nature of it. And he wrote this, what I thought was canonical at the time. I don't know how canonical it actually is, but like text about the thinness of TVs and the fantasy of TV getting flatter and flatter, and that being a kind of sculptural nightmare and whatever. And I kind of bastardized that in my first show. In Germany.
Which I totally, and of course I totally love that work, because I think I'm a television 0.5 or something like that. Television was banned in my house as a kid, so basically I became an addict. And remain so. So this question I asked you at the beginning is television gone? It's a deeply personal and potentially traumatic question for me to ask. But but I love in this concept of painting being a television that doesn't work, the not working part of it, like the fact that somehow art could be a sort of vestigial effect of technology not kind of carrying out its kind of mission. And I wonder is there also in your work there's a kind of ruthless, almost forensic documentation of how technology is actually working, and technology by which I mean as following your lead, like also the imagery and the slogans and the conferences and like I don't even probably mean anything that looks like technology, whatever that is.
Exactly.
More like all of these protocols, like all these, it seems to me that do you have also an interest in the kind of the way they don't work or the not working?
For sure. And I'm as interested in problems that are created by these paradigms as I am by, supposed hero stories or people at the front of the thing. I mean, I endlessly problematize the claims in which I present. I mean, I don't editorialize, as you say, but I certainly don't shy to put the things that read with several meanings at the front. I mean, I made an artwork also once about you, because you were part of the conference.
That's right. I was in the DLD 12.
Yeah, and there's an image of you in as a part of this exact DLD conference in a panel called Mobile Metropolis, where you say, I believe it's right now, it's really a mistake to point to a digital revolution, and I hear this term a lot in this conference. So you were even critical of the conference you were at, but it was quite funny because I mean, as I say, like moving through that material, I was as critical as I was dazzled by it, and excited by the claims, but also repelled by the claims, and I think this antagonism. This productive antagonism for me between particularly those people who work in commercial spaces and try to claim a lot, and why are those people able to do that? What is always compelling to me. So I editorialize, but I also reinforce, and actually this also gets me into trouble sometimes because people find my work sometimes critical enough, sometimes not, and that's.
And do they complain about the fact that they're not sure whether you are or not?
Yeah, this is something that people have.
You're supposed to clarify that. Yeah.
Yeah, some people have real trouble with that, and they kind of cannot get beyond it. You know, that's one of the things, and that's just it shuts down a certain level of people who really want a very clear statement. And I think especially I notice also that changes over time. I think at moments when crisis is and a lot of complicated politics is right at the front of everybody's mind, in all discursive circumstances that I go in and out of, those times are the times when people want clarity. And I think the times when people are more comfortable with ambiguity and at times when they're less triggered by various things that they find ultimately repulsive.
Right, and maybe it's kind of great, but also slightly weird that they care what you think.
Also, I mean, I certainly don't see myself as a guy, and nor do I think my opinion is often particularly well informed. I mean, certainly at the time when I went into these rooms, I often knew nothing about what was going on and who these people were. That became clear after the fact, but I often
blockchain would be the perfect example, right? Because blockchain, by its very definition, depends, I suppose, not that I know anything about it, but it seems to depend on a kind of mystery.
Well, it definitely depends on a story. Like even some people say that the main thing about blockchain is not technological, or the technology is the story, right? Like that's the triumph it shows, because actually the ledger, so to speak, that is supposedly at the heart of this is actually not a particularly difficult or advanced thing. It's more the story that drove Bitcoin, and then all these things cocktail. No.
But if there is this narrative which sort of spins maybe simple things, but spins them so fast that it becomes a mystery.
Yes.
Your kind of work with that mystery then might take a kind of more or less classical form of the artist somehow, as it were, bringing to light, you know, the mysteries of the world that we live in, right?
Yes, and also the people that make it. I mean, I always think that the artist is making portraits of people who can afford to produce them is a very, you know, I'm glad that exists in the past, and I'm happy, you know, I'm fine to be a part of that tradition, you know.
Right. So something that I was thinking, you know, in my world, if that could be, let's say, the world of architecture, for a moment, I can find the parallel figures to the Beryl's and later the, you know, Judith Barry and so on. In other words, I can find TV sets in architectural projects. Right. I can find them, and particularly in the 60s and 70s, and they are always associated with these claims about new kinds of society and so on that we've talked about. In general, architects hate TV because TV seems to do everything it is that the architect promises to do and better. So the majority opinion of the architectural field is just to act as if TV never happened. So what interests me then are these moments where it does happen. And it seems to me, I know a little bit about the one about, you know, how it appeared in architecture, and which architects, for example, if I pull the TVs out, their work disappears.
Right.
And there's a group of artists for which that's the same. And I was thinking, that what are your thoughts about that television gallery in Berlin in whenever that was, 60?
That was Düsseldorf, I guess.
Was it?
I mean, it's either Düsseldorf or Cologne. It was in West Germany, and it wasn't in Berlin. And what was the name of the guy? I was obsessed with him for a while.
So like 1969, 68, 69.
Yes, exactly. We have to.
What's your spin on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was, when I discovered it, I thought it was a revolutionary thing, and I kind of got the book, and luckily the gallerist I was working with at the time, Danny Warhols, he had this kind of book, and I was, oh, thank you, and I kind of got myself, you know, right into it, and then I realized how canonical it was. But of course, I mean, there were a number of people in West Germany working with Rundfunks at the time, like various different broadcasters, like the West German Rundfunk was very interested in artists, so that was there was actually quite a lot of artists working with broadcast, more so than in the US before cable. Right. And that was an amazing thing, that TV gallery, but it was also very short. Like, that was the other thing that was clear to me. It had a moment, you know, and sort of the perfect articulation of it was done once, and then it was over. And it was actually more a video art thing than a broadcast thing as well. Like, there was a broadcast aspect to it, but I mean, certain people who take this type of stuff very seriously, there is art made for screens, you know, video art, and then there is art that is made for broadcast, and you know, you shouldn't confuse the two, because they're kind of like different mediums.
This is I think what I was sort of in a way hoping you would say, because now that only hoping now that I heard you say it, is, you see, in architecture, the same. It appears, and it's almost immediately embarrassing even to the people who did it, right? So, and then it seems that the word video has this like high status.
Right.
If an artist says, I'm going to do a video work, everybody's like,
right.
Well, very interesting. I mean, now maybe to say you're doing a video work may be considered a bit old-fashioned. Whereas,
it's a bit now, right?
Yeah, up until 10 years ago, that meant you were
research, serious. You could get something done. Yeah.
But the moment you say television, somehow popular culture, corporate culture, capitalist culture, linguistic mafias, etc. The resonances seem to be so strong that that everybody pulls back. And of course, I'm then attracted to that like a moth to the flame, because this point of embarrassment. I mean, since your work was definitely TV, like when you started, but it's not now, not so obviously. Are you two shying away from television as a?
No, not at all. I mean, but I have to say, like, I mean, I never made a piece for broadcast, which was embarrassing to me at the time, right? I mean, I was always in this video. I was claiming to speak to television. I mean, this is the same with blockchain. I've made art about blockchain, but I've never made art with blockchain. And this is also, especially in media art circles, a kind of a value claim. Yeah, like if you actually employ the medium and do something with it, then you are really making kind of work that contributes to a certain space. If you just do an image of a TV or an image of a blockchain person, then that is traditional art, you know. So it's interesting, and I try to push back on that. It's not that I find broadcast or making a blockchain uninteresting, and in fact I do have projects which will do that coming up with blockchain. I do finally found something interesting to make actually as a blockchain, but but I also don't have a hierarchy. I think if people are considering the content and they can make a drawing about it, it doesn't have to be a broadcast, you know. So it's I guess and so to answer your actual question, no, I'm not embarrassed about TV, but I did find it's quite weirdly locally politicized what kind of artwork gets made in that space, you know.
And I don't, for me, I don't, you know, I know a little bit what happens when I say to people that I'm obsessed with TV, and they don't have high hopes for me anyway, so that doesn't really matter. But when you associate a famous person with TV, like this book basically says that Waxman is a TV program, not just that he was obsessed by it, but he was not only thought of himself, but was a TV program. To the lovers of Waxman, this is absolutely a crime, because Waxman is authenticity, calculation, prefabrication. It's about finally architects dealing with the practicalities of their world, and it's just cringeworthy, the TV thing. And so I hope television is still cringeworthy, you know, like because then it still has a subversive role, not as an avatar for either democracy or surveillance, but just a kind of discomfort in you know, in these kinds of binaries. Like I think it still has a kind of anti-binary force. I guess I'm asking, do you feel that also, or this is just because we are two TV addicts?
No, I like the frame, but I also think that TV and movies have got a bit closer, which is also something different. And I think for artists, like making a feature film is still a very high value thing to achieve or want. Like a lot of artists want to make feature films, and they think they want to eschew the gallery public, they want to speak to a larger audience, they want to work with a production budget and value, you know, production values that kind of are indistinguishable from things in the rest of pop culture, and that is a great thing to you know, to live for. And I mean, in the age of Netflix and whatever and Apple TV, you know, a feature film on Netflix or a feature film in a theater, a TV series on Netflix, it's less distinguishable, you know. And I think that is something that actually artists do really want, and that's also something that I've never been attracted to. So, so I don't want to make a feature film, you know. It's totally uninteresting to me.
Okay, Denny does not want to make a feature film. It has been announced here, but you're open to Netflix. Yeah,
I mean, I'm open to everything, of course. Like, I think it's all very interesting, but like. But I'm more interested in these perverse versions of I don't know. I guess I'm attracted by the same resonances as you are in terms of trying to occupy a space which seems prickly to others.
Exactly, slightly out of sync. I mean, maybe this is a good point for us to end because, you know, I think that artists, part of their love to make these big feature films is that finally, for a while, they wanted to make buildings. There's a lot of bad buildings. There's a lot of bad buildings as a result of artists' interest in building.
I can imagine.
Just as there's a lot of bad art because of architects always thinking that they could do that too.
Also, yeah.
But maybe that phase has passed because actually movies are much more expansive, and so in a way, for artists, it's much higher value to make a kind of deluxe, perfect, the perfect imagery for the perfect film. But I think there is a kind of a streaming potential, and I don't know, maybe it's that we have to wait for streaming to die for you to then twist it, archive it, and so on. Yeah. But I should give you the last word, Simon. I mean, the last word, anything you want to say about TV at the end of this discussion? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I do. I have something for you. I just want to grab it. Wait a second. I'm going to disappear into the screen and come back, I guess.
Cool.
Because because you mentioned at the beginning Marshall McLuhan, there's an artwork I did about Marshall McLuhan, which I have in my hand, which I don't know if we can see on the screen. But Marshall McLuhan made this game called the Early Warning System in '68, which you maybe know. It's like it's kind of a silly card game. Yeah. And I made a version where I swapped out his quotes for famous entrepreneurial quotes by contemporary entrepreneurs, which is my version.
Oh, fantastic! Fantastic!
And I'd like to send you one because I think you would enjoy the layering in that thing.
I would. I have, by the way, I have I have McLuhan's one.
Oh, really? So there you go.
If you give me a second, I will disappear.
Yeah.
It's not sitting in its spot, which now I'm nervous about because I love it. I mean, I love the whole, and even the concept of the warning, of course, coming from this surveillance system in the ballistic missiles. So I'm very curious, what are the
just
Simon Denny warnings?
So here's it's in plastic shrink because it's the one I'm going to send you. But like it's Peter Thiel's one, So I said I think the Peter Thiel one says. This is always a problem with elites. They're always skewed in an optimistic direction. So, and that is the King of Hearts.
On that absolutely brilliant note, Simon, a pleasure. Unsurprisingly, a pleasure, and the work irritatingly good. It has to be said. It would be.
And I can't wait to read your book.
It would be helpful for us if you could just once do a shitty show, right? Just so that we But you haven't done it yet. You haven't done it yet.
And accurate.
Hi, Simon.
Thanks, Mark.
Created as the collective database behind the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. But it can do much more than facilitate the exchange of digital money. Information stored in the blockchain is indestructible and incorruptible. Each node in its network automatically and continuously agrees with all other nodes about every record on the blockchain ledger to ensure that they are valid. Because each blockchain entry is programmable, any kind of activity can be stored and verified, not just money or exchange records. It could be a birth certificate, a contract, or even a vote. Information stored in the blockchain is public, transparent, meaning anyone can access it. Now let's take that one step further. For centuries, we have relied on trusted third parties to guarantee trade, a dependency that was born out of necessity. Every transaction on this planet is vouched for by overseeing actors like banks, states, or trade agreements. They provide a framework within which we can securely trade and share information. The blockchain, however, needs no overseeing third parties. Verification is automated in its code. A true reflection of all transactions is guaranteed in its very structure. There is real beauty in the liberal dream of a perfect market, a perfect information system reflecting the true data on exchanges between individuals, drawing a global map of the complexity of human relations. Top-down planning, even if it's well-intended, can only misrepresent a system composed of so many individual interactions. Because centralized planning can never grasp the full and complex reality, it inescapably distorts and corrupts the truth. But the blockchain is the truth. It is a system enabling each and every one of us to take part in the real, vast, marvelous, ever-changing pattern of human interaction, governed only by ourselves, enabled by a code belonging to all, reflecting all.